Okay, hello everyone. Hello, welcome to join us with Jamie here. Yes. And I'm Ru. I'm the host for this session. And today we're gonna have well, you're gonna see what kind of surprise Jamie will bring to you. It sounds like if you read the title, maybe the name, it sounds like not related to technical stuff, but you will see. Okay. I give you the stage, Jamie.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I hope you can hear me okay. So I'm Jamie Taylor, and I am going to talk you through something to do with empathy, sympathy, and compassion for the user. It's something I'm really passionate about. I just want to explain. I'm looking in the camera here. I have the slides over there. So if I'm looking off screen, that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at what you can see here. Um, so yeah, this is a short, it's designed as a short talk just to talk you through some important things that I think are really important that software developers often miss out on. The slides are available at GitHub. I will put a link in the discussion area for both the slides to view in your browser like this and for the source code behind them because it's just HTML. So I will put those links into the discussion area later on. And a quick use before we actually get fully started is that I tend to use emoji to highlight important points. So if there is like one of these speech bubbles, it's some kind of quote. If it's a triangle with an exclamation mark, I'm making a key point. If it's a thought bubble, it's something I want you to think about, maybe a light bulb with some background information. And maybe this notebook with a pen in it is something that I think you should maybe think about this a little bit more and sort of take it away and think about it. This is based on an emoji guide that I use when I'm doing pull requests. So if I want to give one of the people who've worked on some code when I'm working on a code review, I'll say, hey, here's some emoji here that you may want to take a look at. And I'll actually just put that link into the browser so you can take a look at it. So if I paste that in here, it's from Eric the developer. It's a code review emoji guide. It's just so that then you don't end up worrying about oh gosh, we've talked about some stuff and nobody really understands what I mean, because text can be quite difficult to follow. The talk here is actually available on GitHub. Like I said, I'll put the link in the chat, but it is all HTML, and you'll actually find it's got my comments in there that I'm reading off of this screen. So that gives you an idea of what we're actually going to talk about. So there we go. I'm also going to talk about things that are truthy versus truthful. So in a JavaScript context, we're talking double equals rather than triple equals. And that is simply because there's so much information that I could cover, but it's more a case of giving you some ideas that you can go away and Google later. There's this idea of a thing called lies to children. This is not meant to be offensive or anything like that. Lies to children is a phrase that was created by authors Terry Pratchett and Ian Stewart when they were talking about how do we discuss science in a fun way. And the idea is that it's a statement, they are statements that are truthful enough to get the point across without going into any kind of extreme detail. So an example is that when you think of the Earth, it's not actually perfectly round, it's not perfectly spherical, it's kind of smushed a little bit at the top and bottom, sticks out a little bit at the side. But if I say to a child, hey, the world is like a football shape, then they'll totally get that, right? It makes way more sense. So let's move on to the next slide there. The other thing that I always like to start my talks off with is a little bit of ancient wisdom. So this is from Yamaoka Teshu. He was a samurai towards the end of the days of samurai being useful. And he said, wonderful teachings exist. The sword is unfathomable. Do not think that this is all there is. More and more wonderful teachings exist. And the idea is that there's more things to learn in whatever it is that you're learning, right? So I'm going to cover a couple of things as we go along, and you can always just go off and learn a little bit more. That's the way I run my talks. It's like I give you a little bit of information. It might spark an idea. You can then go in and figure that out for yourself a little bit more. So the talk is called Empathy, Sympathy, and Compassion for Users. So I guess first off, we need to talk about what empathy is, right? There are four qualities to empathy, and that's perspective taking, no judgment, recognizing emotion, and communicating when you recognize what that person is and where they are, right? So those are the four things that are required to have empathy for someone. And we've got an example across two images here. So the example here is there is a fox-like character There's a little bit of a cloud above their head and it's raining and it says, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. That's someone who's in a pretty difficult situation. And empathy is when you come along and you say, hey, I know what it's like down here in this hole where you are, and you're not alone. I'm here to help, right? That is what empathy is when you take on board someone's situation and try to respond in a similar way and think about how they are feeling, right? But what empathy is not is it's not sympathy, pity, or sorrow, or knowing that they're in this situation without caring. Pity is when you acknowledge someone's pain but do nothing else, and sympathy is when you display pity, that you acknowledge that they're pain, and you hope that their suffering will go away without actually doing anything about it. Right? Someone hurts themselves, and you go, "Well, that sucks. See you later." That's sympathy. That's not empathy, right? And so that just gives you an idea of where there's loads more to this. This is like a super high level skip past this so you can understand where I'm coming from, right? And then there's this wonderful quote by Scott Hershowitz. I do this a lot. I include quotes from different books. In fact, if I go back a few, these images were from a video by Dr. Brene Brown, who does a lot of work in empathy and compassion. This image and this image. There's a link on one of the final slides for the video, so you should definitely check that out. But yeah, so Scott Hershowitz wrote a book about called Nasty, Brutish, and Short, which was about him trying to introduce his children to moral philosophy or ethics. And one of the things he says that really struck me is that sympathy turns out to be less powerful than empathy because you're not actually trying to help someone. You're just saying, hey, that sucks. Let's move on, right? And the reason for that is that empathy is caring, right? It's when you understand the struggle, you understand what someone's going through, you understand where they are, and you try your best to help. So, in a programming context, what is compassion? And I've written out some pretty bad fake Python code here. So we've got compassion is empathy or sympathy, one of the two, and a desire to relieve suffering. Right, this is the only real bit of code we've got in this talk because it's more of a soft skills talk and a bit of a why we need to build software better. Medical professionals do this all the time, right? They take the empathy and desire to relieve suffering path. So in that branching path there, they're choosing empathy, where maybe sympathy is false, and desire to relieve suffering is true as well, right? You wouldn't want to go to a doctor who didn't have empathy for you. You wouldn't want to go see a nurse who didn't have empathy for you, right? If you turn up to see a doctor and say, "Doctor, I've broken my leg," and they go, "That sucks." Next patient, that's not empathy, right? What you want is someone saying, "That really sucks, and I'm really sorry that that's happened. What can we do to help? Let's get you fixed," right? So we're talking about this from a software development perspective, right? And I'm a software developer. There's a little bit about me towards the end. I want to give you all this information first, then we'll talk about me if we've got time. So why do we need this? There's this wonderful quote by Dylan Beatty. He's the creator of the Rockstar language. If you haven't heard of that, definitely go check it out. And if you can't read that quote, I can make the text bigger. But essentially, he said, and this is in an episode of the Modern.NET show, I think it was episode 46. So I interviewed him at NDC London and we talked about this kind of stuff. He said, "Your code is making someone cry at 3 o'clock in the morning because your really bad error handling might jeopardize their entire career. How do you feel about that?" Now, he was talking about in this situation where, for a bunch of reasons here in the UK where I live, if you want to become a lawyer, you've gone and done your, several years at college and university, you've got your qualifications. There is a 48-hour period where you can actually go and you have to do some kind of vetting of your all of your stuff to apply for the next stage of your career. I think it's to do with like internships and joining different law firms, right? There's a 24 to 48-hour period where you can do that. There is one web app that allows you to do that. The web app was written by a developer who was like, "Yeah, totally, this is totally fine. I'll just create a form and people can just paste things in." Problem is that most non-technical users, most non-developers will use something like maybe Word to create their stuff that they're writing because that has great support for formatting and saving and stuff. They'll then copy paste that into the web and hit send. Now, at the point when we were having this discussion, the tail end of 2019 into 2020, the software itself, it didn't actually. If you pasted stuff from Word, it would bring along these hidden characters, these characters that you can't see, but are to do with printing and things like that. Like this is where a paragraph goes, this is where the bold starts, this bit's underlined, that kind of thing. You hit submit on that form, the form breaks, and it doesn't tell you why it's broken. So at some point, there is someone who, for whatever reason, have left it until 3 o'clock in the morning. Perhaps they've had loads of work to do. Maybe they help look after someone, at home, or maybe they have children or something. They've got some reason for waiting until 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 hours, 3 hours before the deadline, and they're pasting this stuff in and hitting go, and it's failing, right? But they're not given a reason why it's failing, and all that they know is it's not working, and this is going to jeopardize my career, right? The rest of my career is going to be put on hold for another year because I can't figure out how to use this software. So a null ref, or a not a number or undefined or whatever, to you or me as developers is just a null ref. But to someone who relies on that code, it's the difference between achieving the goal they want to achieve and potentially being fired, or in this instance, losing a chance at achieving their dream. And so that's why I talk about empathy, right? We need to understand why the user wants to do what they want to do in order to get to that next step in whatever they're doing, the task that they're achieving. But the problem is that we have a lack of compassion baked into our history as software professionals, as technologists, as whatever phrase you want to use. There is a wonderful book called Hackers. I've got it on my bookshelf. It's behind me, but sort of underneath me, somewhere down here. And it talks about the Model Railway Club. That's what the TMRC means at MIT. That's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the 1960s. What used to happen was these folks were brilliant at putting together all sorts of stuff. They were hired to run the computer networking system for MIT in the 60s, just as it was starting. And they started referring to users as users with a silent L, which means they were calling them losers. So from day one of our entire business, we've been referring to users as really, really sort of just beneath us, right? And that's not where they need to be. We'll come to it later, but the user pays for your lifestyle, right? And so really we should hold them in higher regard. Um, and so I'm just checking through my notes here. So looking down on people like this, calling them losers, shows an incredible lack of empathy, sympathy, and compassion. Genuinely, how many software and technology workers do you know that do this? This is just a question I'm asking you to sort of think of. Do you do it? Do people on your team do it? Do people at your company do it? Do people that you know in the business do it? Um, I've worked with several people in the past who, and I've had to walk away from these pieces of work, very well paid from my perspective, because the rest of the team were like this, and it didn't fly very well with me. And this is me directly quoting someone, right? This is not me saying this. This is another person who had said this, and I'm directly quoting them. This is one of the reasons why I left this company, was that one of the developers I worked with said, and I'm going to do the bunny quote so you can see that I'm quoting someone. This person said she can't be a developer because she's a woman, and that's like a whole different level of lack of empathy, sympathy, compassion, and a whole bunch of bigotry and gendered everything, right? And that shouldn't be happening, right? But it still happens today. But the problem is that it's put under the label of banter, right? Or silly, or office culture and things like that. It really shouldn't be. There's a place for being silly and all that kind of stuff, but there's also a place for actually being kind and compassionate to those around us and to those who are using the tools that we built. Because you got to remember, right? We're building tools. We're not building things that live by themselves. They are used by people. And because of that, like I said about that horrible quote, we have to remember that words are like shrapnel. They cause a lot of hurt in lots of very tiny ways. So this is a quote by a UK comedian, Robin Ince. I don't have the original source for this, but this was a talk that he gave, and I was there when he said it. And words really do have power. They have the power to help or to hurt. And like, if you take the sentence "you're so good" and put a different emphasis on each of the different words, you get a different meaning of the word, right? you're so good, you're so good, you're so good, you're so good. There's loads of different ways to take that, right? And we have to really think about the way that we put our words across and how we treat each other, right? And I've got another quote by someone who traditionally is not a very good person for doing this kind of thing, but I've like teamed it up with another quote. Um, I've quoted Linus Torvalds. Now, Linus Torvalds, for those who don't know, is effectively the architect of Linux. He created it, and he still sort of works on it. All changes go through him. There were, a number of years ago, he was in a position where he said some horrid things and was taken away and done some training and come back to be a better person. But before then, he'd said a project with no users is a pointless project. I want you to think about that, right? The software that you make, if you push the users away, then the software that you've made is pointless because it's not going to have any users, it's not going to make any money, it's not going to make the company you work for any money, or it's not going to make you any money. It's not going to be used, it's not going to have a point. And then Immanuel Kant. Now, I'm not a Kantian. I don't follow all of his philosophy, but he said something really interesting. He said we should treat people as people and not a means to an end. So he's saying that everybody's different. Everybody is equal. And we should just treat people like they are people. We shouldn't treat them like a way to achieve something. And this last quote is one of my favorites from. I've already mentioned him so far. I'm a big fan of Terry Pratchett's writing. He said, "There are no greys, only white that's gotten grubby. And sin is when you treat people as things." And I think these three comments, I think these three quotes here, really underline the point that you need to really think about people. And how we all fit together. Like, for instance, there is a Linux distribution called Ubuntu, which is a Swahili phrase, and it's all about we are only people through other people, right? We can only exist with other people around us, and we can't exist to the best of our ability without empathy, sympathy, and compassion, because these folks won't flock to us and won't help us to reach our potential, and we won't be able to help them to reach their potential, right? And that's all that we do. As software developers, we're just helping people to reach their potential. So really quickly, I'm just going to come through an idea of reporting bugs, right? Because that's usually where a lot of people hit upon a sticking point when they're dealing with users of software or project managers or people other than developers. So when we have a bug reported to us, we need to remember that if we treat people inhumanely, this is Scott Hershevitz again, if we treat people inhumanely, we should never be surprised when they return that favor. If I treat you badly, I shouldn't be surprised if you treat me badly back. It's a really bad example, but if someone punches me in the face, I'm likely to punch them in the face again. I'm not a violent person, and it's a really bad example. But that's what we've got to think about. And so when someone reports a bug with any software that we've built, we need to try and remember that it's not a personal attack, because it isn't one. The code is not you, right? You've got to remember that someone has managed to find a gap in our collective understanding. Maybe you're in a team, maybe you work by yourself, maybe you're working with a huge amount of people. There is a collective understanding of what the software should do, and there's a gap in that knowledge. That's not a case of this is bad, I should take it as a personal attack, because it means that there's a corner case that we didn't cover, right? By finding that gap, we have the ability to make the software objectively better, right? Better designed, better error handling, more fit for purpose by solving that bug, right? That doesn't mean that you're a bad developer because there are bugs in the software. We should never respond to someone reporting a bug or an issue or anything with our code with, how dare you tell me that my software is bad? We should never respond like that, because it's not about them telling you that your software is bad. It's about them saying, I've discovered this thing and it doesn't fit the model that we have in our heads for how this software should work. Because I mean, it can hurt to have someone point out a flaw in something we've created, right? I'm a podcaster, I'm a musician. If I play something and somebody says you shouldn't have gone to a C major chord there, you should have gone to maybe an F major chord there, I'm not going to be upset. I'm going to take that as a learning experience and go, well, you know what? I thought it was better as a C, and I'm creating this thing. I'll try it with an F next time, right? And we have to remember that it's not their fault for pointing. Let's imagine that this person isn't a malicious user, right? They're just an average user. They're trying to achieve a goal, right? When someone points out some issue or some misunderstanding with what we've built, it's not their fault. It's not your fault. There is no fault, right? A lot of companies talk about there being no fault in and no judgments when things go wrong. My personal opinion, very few companies actually do that, but we have to remember, right, that we're communicating with with a language that is this is why ubiquitous language exists, right? We need to use the language that the business or the user or the customer uses in order to be able to actually build what they want, right? And we're communicating in a language that is built on vagary, right? But we can't be vague when it comes to software. It has to be very specific. Yeah, the computer can't go, well, kind of sometimes maybe if it's a Tuesday and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, do it this way. It has to always do it this way, right? That you can have ifs and stuff like that, but you can't be as vague as I was, right? And how we do that is we talk about listening. The most important thing that we can do when someone reports an issue is to take a moment, take a breath, or if we find an issue or whatever, take a moment and take a breath and just calm, you make sure that we're in a calm, lovely space. And then remember what Marshall B. Rosenberg says, and that is all criticism, attacks, insults, and judgments vanish when we focus our attention on hearing the feelings behind the message, right? So I found this in a wonderful book by Sarah Drasner called Engineering Management for the Rest of Us. And Sarah is actually quoting a book called Nonviolent Communication, which is where this quote comes from. Um, and we can apply this whenever we see a bug or an error. And whenever an error report comes in, if we see it as a personal attack, if we remove any of the feelings behind it and just say, if somebody says, the button should be red, right? Those words are pretty innocuous. It doesn't really mean the button should be red, you idiot, or it shouldn't really mean you should know that the button should be red. It's just the button should be red. So if you can divorce all of emotion from that and just focus on what they're telling you, you can say, hey, brilliant. I'll go make the button red. Not a problem. I see why it should be red. I understand now. Let's go get this working. Because it's not a personal attack. By focusing on what the person is saying, we can cut through that defensive feelings that we may have and get to what they're actually feeling and why they're feeling it. Which may lead us directly to the why of what's being reported, which we'll come on to really quickly in a minute. Most of this is going to be sort of high level soft skill stuff. We're going to talk about the why in a moment. And then once we've got the why, we can then turn around and look at it with empathy, and then we can understand what they're trying to achieve. Remember, we as software professionals, as software developers, as software makers, as software whatever, technologists in some way, shape, or form, we're force multipliers. When people use our software, when they use our products, when they use what we've created, we can multiply their ability to be productive and effective and all that kind of stuff. We make them look amazing. But the only way that we can make them look amazing is if we understand where they're coming from. And the way that we do that is we need to focus on the fact that software is a tool. This is where the empathy, sympathy, and compassion comes in. All the software that we make is a tool. Like you're seeing me show slides in my web browser. The web browser is a tool that helps me to do something, right? It reduces the complexity, it doesn't get in the way, and it doesn't cause any kind of physical or emotional pain. The only way that we can do those things is if we design the software with compassion, with an understanding of what the user is trying to achieve. If we don't have those things, then we can't do that. Someone is going to be using whatever you've built to achieve a certain goal. I feel like, I feel like the physical manufacturing space gets this more so than perhaps us as software technology professionals. This cup, right? This cup is here to achieve the goal of storing liquid in it and allowing me to pour it into my mouth so I can drink it. With that in mind, it's designed so that like it will sit on a surface, and when it's sitting flat on a surface, it doesn't wobble. It's got a lid on it with a small hole for me to drink through so I can put hot fluids in here and not have to worry about burning my mouth. I can also, to a certain extent, pour it to the side, turn it to the side, and it won't dribble. Like it's already at the edge of the cup there. You can't really see it. It won't dribble out all over my desk or all over my hands or whatever. It's built with this idea of how do we create this with compassion to allow the user to understand what it is they need to do. So our software allows a user to achieve a goal, right? That goal might be related to their work. So maybe it's, they want to create a TPS report. It might be related to their personal life or a dream that they have. Perhaps, going back to our earlier quote about our lawyers in the UK. If you remember that quote from earlier, as Dylan pointed out, and you should definitely go listen to that episode, because not just because I'm the host of that show, but because what he has to say is absolutely fascinating. If you listen to that episode, you'll realize that your software is stopping this user from doing a thing. And it might be making them cry, which is creating emotional distress. Someone who wanted to create a thing to make it easier for someone to do something has actually not only not made it easier, they've made it harder, and they've caused emotional pain, right? So we need to design our software with compassion for that user, not just the UI and the UX though. We're talking error handling, logging, friendly error messages, and I don't just mean the whoopsie doopsie floopsie, we can't find it smiley face. That's pointless, right? A whoopsie doopsie floopsie message with a smiley face doesn't help me to achieve what I'm trying to do. We need to design all of that with the user in mind. It's a really violent metaphor. I apologize. I don't know why I'm using violent metaphors today, but if I designed a chainsaw that had a simple goal of just cutting down trees, but didn't take into consideration that people would use it, there might be an awful lot of lumberjacks called Lefty because they'd accidentally cut their arms off. It's a really horrible metaphor. I do apologize, but it gets the point across. I need to design it so that people can use it. And all of that is to say that this image perfectly underlines what I'm talking about, right? The person in the green t-shirt, I guess, is wanting to get a response. The response comes back from the server 200 OK, and when they look at it, it says actually there's a status code with 400 and a bad request. I'm not going to sit here and explain a meme to you. Hopefully you get the point of this, but this is what's happening. The user, the client, the person in the green t-shirt wants to do something. And we've actually stopped them from doing that because we've responded in a non-standard way. This is why standards exist. But the user isn't able to actually do anything with this. If this was a web app, the website might actually say, yeah, that went fine. Don't worry about it. Whereas actually, whatever it is that the user tried to do failed miserably, and they'll never know. So then when they come to sit in a meeting with their boss and the boss says, why didn't you file that report? I filed the report. The website said it went through okay, but actually it didn't, right? So how do we do this, right? Because it's all right me sitting here and saying we need to do better, we need to do this, that, and the other, but how do we do it? So first off, we need to have open discussions about the software that we're making. We need to talk about the design, the execution, and we need to make sure we're talking without blame. Now, like I said earlier on, a lot of companies claim not to have a blame culture, but they all have a blame culture. And we need to think about how we have build compassion for the user. When bugs and error reports come in, we need to have an open, honest, and frank discussion about what happened. Not why it happened, what happened. Not who caused it, what happened. And this discussion needs to happen without blame. The door fell off. Not Jamie kicked the door and the door fell off, just the door fell off. How do we fix the fact that the door fell off? We put the door back where it is, we get the screwdriver out, screw it back onto the wall. We don't have to worry about the fact that Jamie kicked the door because he was falling into the room because maybe he'd fallen over, or maybe he was carrying too many coffees and burnt himself. We can fix that later, right? We have empathy and sympathy and compassion for him for burning himself, but we don't talk about, oh, well, he'll be in trouble because he fell into the door. Like I said, lots of companies claim to have no blame culture, but very few actually do have no blame culture. And why do we need to think about it without a blame? Because when you blame someone, they feel shame, right? And shame is one of the worst things that a team can actually have. I mentioned Dr. Brené Brown earlier on. Honestly, if you read any of her books, they will change your life. They'll make you way better at software. And she doesn't talk about software, she talks about people. So Dr. Brené Brown has spent her entire academic career from around the age of 18 through to the age she is now, I'm very aware that first of all, I don't want to be ageist, and secondly, me saying it would be very short-sighted. Um, and she has spent this entire academic career looking into the effects of shame on company culture, not just how people feel shame and what happens, but on a company's culture. And her results have been absolutely staggering. And honestly, you can pick up any of her books, read one of her books, and it'll make you a better developer. She said there is nothing productive about blame, and it often involves shaming someone or just being mean. If blame is a pattern in your culture, then shame needs to be addressed as an issue. And that's from her book, Daring Greatly. She talks about how if you're always blaming someone, then there is a shame culture, and then everyone, somebody will feel afraid to do their job. And what happens there is if you feel that shame, you're never going to report something that's gone wrong, which means it will go wrong silently and it will be much worse. That's a topic for another day, but that's what happens. But remember, we're having this open discussion about software. We need to also remember it is never the user's fault. Putting malicious users to one side again, right? Um, you or your team allowed them to do whatever they did. The team who built it allowed them to do whatever it did. The user doesn't know what the side effects are, right? I don't know whether this crosses the international barrier, but if I walk up to a sidewalk crossing, a pedestrian crossing as we call them in the UK, I press the button to say I want to cross the street, and then I get an electric shock, whose fault is it? It isn't mine, because I didn't expect to get an electric shock by pushing a button to cross the street, right? It's not my fault. I'm not the person to blame, right? When I call the city planning office and say, hey, I was at the corner of 27th and 7th or whatever, I don't know, I'm making up street names, and I wanted to cross the street and I got an electric shock and I ended up in the hospital for 2 days. That's not my fault. I'm reporting an issue, and the city planning office shouldn't say, "Well, you should have known. You shouldn't have pushed that button." Right? It's a thought experiment. It doesn't really work because in order to make that work, we have to abandon the idea of malicious users tinkering with it, right? But imagine that I've walked up to this pedestrian crossing. There's no sign that says you will get an electric shock if you push this button. There's nothing there that tells me I will get an electric shock. The user is not to blame. I cannot be blamed for pushing that button. If I produce some software, this may or may not be a real story. If I'm working as part of a team and we produce some software and it has a gigantic red drop the database button, and the user pushes the drop the database button, not knowing what it is, it's a giant red button. I'm quite excited. I'm going to be moving around the UI. Now you got to remember, software developers and users sometimes are completely different people. You can't expect the user to understand what a software developer uses. If I create a delete the database button and a user pushes that, and then I allow the user's action to lead to the database being deleted without any kind of confirmation, without any backups in place, it is not the user's fault. The user is not to be blamed for that because you and or the team gave them that power and you didn't put anything in place to stop that database from being deleted. Again, this is all a thought experiment, right? It's not reality. This isn't really how reality works. We're not going to talk about individuals getting in trouble and stuff, but that's the whole point I'm driving towards. Is it isn't the user's fault. If a user copies some code, copies some command off of the internet, like rimraf / right, or so for those who don't know Linux, Mac OS, and Bash and things like that, rm space dash rf space / says delete everything on the drive and don't ask me for confirmation. For the longest time, that didn't ask for confirmation. On modern Mac OS and Linuxes, it says, hey, you're about to do something relatively malicious and it might destroy all the data on your computer. Are you absolutely sure? And then it asks you again, because then it's not the user's fault for deleting all that data, right? So what we need to think about is we need to think about our choices. My friend Steve Worthy has this wonderful thing, says the effects of our good decisions could change the world around you. But the problem there is you have to think about what the good decisions are. So what are the good decisions? So we need to think about how our software being built will change everything around us. We need to think about every single decision, good and bad, will change the world. And so we need to really think about how the decisions we make when we build the apps, the services, the technologies that we're building might affect the greater world. So how do we do that? So what do we do? Sorry, what do we do? We need to be the change that we want to see. We need to be careful with our words because they are like shrapnel. I apologize, everyone, for the really horrible, violent metaphors. And we need to never, ever, ever blame the user, unless, of course, they are malicious users, and then we can blame them. Um, but the problem is that nothing will change overnight because we live in an Overton window. For those who don't know, I'm just going to really quickly show you. An Overton window is a metaphor created by Joseph Overton to describe the sliding scale of acceptance over time. Um, you know, if you do this with what we've talked about and slowly make changes, because you can't make immediate change, right? The whole point of things like Kaizen and things like that is that you slowly make incremental changes over time to create a better solution. That's kind of, it's not those words, but that's what Kaizen means, is to slowly make incremental changes to make everything better, right? There's a whole thing about Overton windows. Is definitely worth taking a look at. But examples of this would be TDD and BDD, right? If you do test-driven development, you write a test, you change the software to make it pass the test, then you write another test to change the software to make it pass the test. You're making tiny changes over time and shifting that Overton window slowly towards the software doesn't do what we want it to do, over to where the software does what we want it to do. So what is the point? The point is to never be the best from day one. You are not going to be the best now, but you can be better tomorrow than you were today. And I say you, I mean the entire industry. We as an industry can be better at this tomorrow than we were today. And that's the idea of Kaizen. It's the idea of atomic habits. It's the idea of habit stacking. It's compound interest. By slowly making those tiny changes, tomorrow will be better than we were yesterday, which means that in a year's time, we'll be 35 times better than we were at the beginning of the year. But does that mean that we need to demand perfection? Now, Michael Schur is the creator of a bunch of American TV shows, The Office. He worked on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and he worked on one of my favorite shows, The Good Place. And he said he wrote a book about philosophy after making the TV show The Good Place. And he talks about how to demand perfection or to hold people to impossible standards is to deny the simple and beautiful reality that nobody is perfect. We're not perfect. We're not going to get this right. We're never going to get it right, even if we have practiced this every single day for the rest of our lives. Or in short, nobody's perfect, right? Which comes from one of the first few episodes of my favorite TV show, The Good Place. If you've seen The Good Place, you'll know what this is about. If you haven't seen The Good Place, it's just literally she makes a mistake and she says, hey, nobody's perfect. But she says, nobody's perfect, pointing out that she isn't perfect. She doesn't say it properly, right? So as we begin to wrap up, there's a bunch of books and videos that I would love for you to check out. If you're a reading type person or you like to listen to audiobooks, these books here, Nasty, Brutish and Short by Scott Hershowitz, How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur. How to Be Perfect is what he wrote after writing the TV show the Good Place. Any of Dr. Brene Brown's books. There's a book called Hackers, Heroes of the Computing Revolution by Stephen Levy. That's where I got the losers thing from. Users with a silent L, losers. And The Friendly Orange Glow by Brian Deere, which talks about how we got to where we are with software. And I would always recommend, I know we're running low on time here, so I'll be really quick. I'd always recommend reading reading books or consuming content that is outside of your main career interest. In this context, we're talking about software development, so go read books outside of software development. In 2022, I picked up a book which explored the teachings of The Good Place, which is what How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur is. And I am convinced that this is one of the greatest TV shows ever made. Not because it's funny, but because it teaches, every single episode teaches like 4 different lessons. And after I read that book, I started a journey that I'm still on, where I'm learning about philosophy and ethics and all that kind of stuff. And some of these books reinforce what you've already learned in those development spaces. For instance, I've done a thumbs up. Fantastic. But in a way that maybe you didn't expect. Some examples of non-dev related books that will make you a better dev. The Marie Kondo book about tidying up, which is something like the hidden magic of tidying up, sometimes called KonMari. That's about refactoring. Essentialism by Greg McKeown is about doing just what is necessary to actually get the work done. So those are two brilliant books that are not about development that I guarantee will make you a better developer. Essentialism is essentially talking about TDD without talking about TDD. Con Murray is talking about refactoring code without actually talking about writing any code. In fact, she talks about socks quite a lot. So if you want to learn about socks and refactoring code, go read the Con Murray book, the Life Changing Magic of Tidying Up, or whatever it's called. And I definitely would recommend watching The Good Place. In fact, the very first version of this talk that I put together started out being called The Good Place, but for software developers. So I would definitely I recommend go checking that out. Here's a bunch of links to some stuff. I will put the link to these slides. It is just an HTML page, so you can grab all of these into the chat in a moment, so you can grab that. And then there's more links as well. Again, I will put all of these links into the chat or something. I'll ask Aru to pass them on. More things. The Rockstar episode with Dylan Beatty that I used for this. A couple of blog posts I've put out. An episode of Tabs and Spaces. I used to do Tabs and Spaces. My own client code of conduct for my software company that talks about essentially this, but we will fire a client if they violate this. And then one last thing. A little bit about me, because I wanted to give you all the value up front and then talk about me afterwards. So in this order, most important to least important, I'm a dad, a mentor, a podcaster. I work on the modern.net show Waffling Tellers and their recently retired Tabs and Spaces. I'm an AI specialist, a software developer, a Microsoft MVP, as you can see by my very, very flashy mug. In that order. I'm on Twitter at podcasterj. My DMs are open, so if you want to contact me, please feel free to send a DM through. There's loads of different places for that. And very last but not by any means least, thank you all for listening, and thank you for the folks from ABP for putting this whole thing on. So I hope I've not gone over time.
No. Perfect time. Thank you so much, Jamie.
Hey,
Thank
no
you for
worries.
sharing your insights. I hope everyone here, you learned something and got inspired by Jamie's recommendations, no matter the books or the TVs. I hope you got the giveaways. Takeaway, sorry. Well, it's also giveaway, let's say. Knowledge giveaway. Yeah. All right, let's check about the questions we got here. First one. Mm, can you see the question, Jamie?
Sorry, just let me have a look. Where am I looking? Sorry, let's see if I can find it. Just trying to
Uh,
find. Are
if
you
are you
showing it
in
on
the
your screen? Oh, sorry. Very helpful. Sorry, yeah, I'm not sure where I'm looking to see the question. I
no
do
worries. I
apologize.
can read the questions
Okay,
to you.
sure.
So here's the question. Even if we blame the malicious users, it mostly doesn't solve the original problem. Maybe there are no exceptions to never blame the user. From a development perspective,
So I would say from a software development perspective, as long as it's not a malicious user, so it's not someone who's intentionally trying to break the code, the product, or trying to break in and steal some things, then I think that if you start blaming the user, then you're in a bad place. It's a rule of thumb, right? It's not a hard and fast rule. There will be times when the user has intentionally done something wrong or found themselves lost. But if I'm in a brand new situation, right? If I'm trying to learn, I don't know, how to tap dance, right? And I get something wrong, that's not my fault. That's the fault of the teacher because they aren't teaching me in a way that I can get it right. Yeah. And we kind of have to think with that with from my perspective, we kind of have to think with that thought process. As long as you're not thinking that they are a malicious user, that they are intentionally doing something to break everything, then most of the time we have to think, well, it's not their fault. Maybe I didn't make the user interface obvious that when they click this button, this thing will happen. Or I didn't make it obvious that if they paste some text in here, that it's not going to work because the validation isn't there. But it's also there's no blame for you either. It's a learning experience. That's the important thing, is that we're not blaming anyone. We're saying there is a gap in our understanding of what this problem is that we needed to solve, and we need to put something in place to fix that gap. With the example earlier on of the user interface for forwarding your career, the person who put that together didn't expect people to use Microsoft Word to type up all of their ideas and thoughts and post it from there. Because if they'd have thought about that, then maybe they'd have thought, well, maybe I need to put some, maybe one line of regex in there, one line of regular expressions to actually strip out all of those non printable characters so that we can post that to the database. That's all it takes, right? But then that user hadn't, that developer, sorry, hadn't thought that the users would use Microsoft Word. Whereas actually, it's one of the most ubiquitous pieces of software out there, right? And that same solution will help for if people use Notepad, if they use HTML, if they use Markdown. It just makes it easier. And so that I think is the important thing, is that we're not blaming the user, but we're also not blaming ourselves or anyone else. We just need to think in the pie chart of this app, there is a small segment that we need to fill in because we didn't quite understand all of the problem domain. And some most of the time when that happens, that's because it wasn't explained fully to us. Because like I said, we're dealing in a language of vagary, right? I'm talking to you with words that are based on my own understanding of the world, my own metaphors, my own culture, my own background, and I'm trying to put it across in a way that anyone from anywhere in the world who maybe isn't even a software developer can perhaps understand what I'm saying. And that's what happens in business, is that businesses come along and they say, right, we'll tell you about our thing we want you to build, but we won't actually tell you everything you need to know, just a few things, and we'll let you assume some things. And that's where these bugs and issues come from, is that people are having to make these assumptions because no one has been very clear when they've described it, or perhaps the person above you, who maybe they're the BA, maybe they're the project manager, maybe whatever, they haven't thought to ask this question because there was this misunderstanding and different ideas and different. Hopefully, I'm rambling a lot, but hopefully there's something in there that answers your question.
Okay, thank you so much. The friend who Sin is the friend who asked this question. I hope you got inspired. And Jamie, we have one
Mhm.
more question, but actually it's asking about, could you please share the slide, your presentation slide somewhere? Or
Yeah,
maybe we can find your presentation somewhere.
sure. Yep, I'm just getting some links together and I will paste them into the chat system that we use for the ABP framework .NET Conf. So if I just
Excellent.
double check,
Or you
if you
can
bear
also
with me
share
one
with
moment.
me. I can
Yeah,
put the links here.
okay,
Maybe.
yeah, I will. Yep. So if I yeah, I'll send you the links, and then I will put. Hopefully, then
All right.
everyone can
Yeah,
see that.
I will definitely put all the links I got from Jamie and share with you here at left chat. Okay, that's all the question I got from here. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here with Jamie. I believe you got learned, and well, hopefully it's helpful for your no matter career or as a developer, another new angle. And thank you again, Jamie, for sharing your perspectives as a developer with your experience and your story.
Thank you ever
Uh,
so much for having me.
Thank you. So hopefully see you for the next one in next year AP conference. Bye bye everyone.
Bye, everyone.